In today's recipe, I'm going to be showing you how to make this delicious, moist, light chestnut cream cake that consists of layers of a chestnut jam, chestnut cream, and the softest sponge you have ever seen in your life. If you're new here, my name is Sophia and I'm a professional pastry chef in New York City, and I show you guys how to create restaurant quality desserts in the comfort of your own home. So if you like desserts that aren't too sweet, light, airy, and full of texture, then keep watching. First, we are going to make this super soft sponge. This recipe is fairly simple, but it all comes down to technique. So be sure to follow each step closely so that you can get the perfect texture. First, I'm going to melt together 18 grams of milk and 64 grams of butter in a pot and then set that aside to cool. For this recipe, we are going to need 8 large eggs, except we are going to separate the whites from the yolks and then begin to whip the egg whites. It's very, very important that you have super pure, clean egg whites. So be super gentle when you're separating the yolks from the whites so that we don't get any of the fat from the yolk into the whites, because that will compromise how stiff we can whip those egg whites. Once the egg whites get a little frothy, we are going to begin adding in 49 grams of sugar gradually in 3 separate stages, and then whip the egg whites to a medium to stiff peak. I'm beating my egg whites on the lowest setting on my mixture so that I can get really tiny, like micro bubbles into the batter, rather than whipping it on a super high speed, which will incorporate a lot of big air bubbles. This will result in a finer and more even, delicate crumb texture. Now that our egg whites are at medium peaks, I am going to quickly add in all of our egg yolks and then just whip that to combine the yolks about halfway. Don't be too concerned if you still have yellow streaks of yolk in the batter, because we still have more mixing to do. Now I am going to sift in 90 grams of flour and begin to gently fold the mixture. You want to be very gentle and delicate while folding this base, because we're relying mainly on mechanical leaveners to inflate our cake. There's no chemical leaveners such as baking powder or baking soda. So the reason that this cake is so fluffy is all because of air. And the more that we fold this base, the more air we are going to push out. Now we are going to mix in our butter and milk, but because the butter and milk is so fluid and dense, we have to lighten it. If we were to add the milk and butter directly in this stage, it would sink right to the bottom. So we are going to sacrifice some of our sponge batter and mix it into the liquid until it's all combined, and then fold it into the rest of the batter. Give it a few more turns until everything is combined. And then we can transfer this into an 8-inch cake pan that has been well oiled and lined with parchment paper. This will allow for an easy release. And right before we put this into the oven, I'm going to drop the cake pan to force out any large air bubbles that might be inside. And then this sponge is going to bake at 325 for about 30 to 45 minutes. You'll know that this cake is done when a toothpick comes out clean and the top is just lightly golden. You're not going to get much color out of this sponge. Now that the cake is completely cooked, I'm going to tap it out once more and then directly flip this onto a cooling rack. This step is crucial. You want to make sure that you are flipping it right when it comes out of the oven, because the sides will cave in. Trust me, it happened to me. Now, while our sponge cools, let's move on to the other components. I am going to make a quick soaking syrup that's a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to place 50 grams of sugar and 100 grams of water in a pot with 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Just bring this to a boil and then set it aside to cool. Since this is a chestnut cake, we need chestnuts. I absolutely love chestnuts. And apparently so do Diamond and Ghost, because they came running once I opened the package. I'm going to be using 2 packs for this recipe and chopping them roughly, but before I do that, I'm going to pick out a few of the really nice ones and set them aside to use as a garnish, and then chop up the rest. Now our last component is the chestnut cream, and it is so easy. We are going to whip up 500 grams of heavy cream, and once we reach a soft peak, I'm going to add in 175 grams of chestnut puree. This puree that I'm using is already sweetened perfectly, so we are not adding in any more sugar. I got this puree off of Amazon. I will link the one that I am using in the description bar below. Personally, I don't love overly sweet dessert, which is why I always stress the importance of balance. I don't want to feel disgusting and sick after a few bites of dessert. I want to be able to eat 3 slices and live my life to the fullest. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so we're gonna add in the chestnut puree, whip this to a medium peak, and then we are all ready to assemble. I am going to level the top of the cake and then cut it into 3 half-inch slices. Place the base of your cake onto your cake board and then soak it with 1/3 of our soaking syrup. Nobody wants a dry cake. Nobody wants that. I am evenly spreading a thin layer of that chestnut puree. Now I'm going to take half of our chestnut cream and whip it to a bit of a stiffer peak, but not a completely stiff peak. That's because this portion of cream is going to be in the center as the layers of this cake. Therefore, it needs to have a little bit more structure. If you were to fill this cake with a soft cream, it would just spill out when we started stacking our cake. Then I am adding in half of our chopped chestnuts, followed by just a little more cream to kind of sandwich in the chestnuts. And then we are moving on to the second layer, which is the exact same thing. Jam, cream, chestnuts, a little bit more cream, and then another layer of sponge. Now for our final layer, I am soaking it with syrup and then moving straight into icing it with the other half of the chestnut cream that we did not whip again. Icing a cake can be quite challenging, and just like every other skill, requires a lot of practice. So just take your time with this step and add on more cream than you think you will need. I always add the cream to the top of my cake and then work my way to the sides. You can paint it down the sides, or you can use a piping bag. Then you want to use either a spatula or a bench scraper to get the edges really perfect. Just rotate your turntable and keep your bench scraper upright, sitting on the cake board, and then just rotate it until it looks good. Now for the top of the cake, I'm taking 150 grams of the same chestnut puree and beating it together with 30 grams of room temperature butter until it is all homogenized. Then I'm placing it in a piping bag with a small round tip and beginning to pipe side to side until I covered the top of the cake. If you have a grass piping tip, this would be a lot easier. Now I am taking the remaining cream in a piping bag with a Saint Honore tip and piping a border along the top of the sponge, adding those perfect pieces of chestnuts that we preserved earlier, finishing it off with some gold dust, and we are all ready to dig in. Vinci. For another recipe. This cake is life-changing. Obviously, as a chef, I'm always super happy when I've finally perfected a recipe, but time to time you get lucky where a dessert comes out way better than you were expecting it to, and this is one of those recipes. So let's dig in. This is it. It is so soft and moist, but full of texture, but not like a crunchy texture, more of a really satisfying bite from the chestnuts. The cake is perfectly balanced, it is not too sweet, and pairing the nutty chestnuts with a lighter cream just works so well. So give this recipe a shot and let me know how you like it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.